The main part of the conversation, Plan B, that Rebecca and I had earlier today, was around this report about stress and burnout among teachers. And Rebecca and I talked about it. She shared her views. And then we got voice notes and text messages from teachers who want to quit and teachers who have quit and partners of teachers who feel unbelievably stressed. And you hear that human story. You hear somebody saying, I am so glad that I quit teaching 2 years ago. My life is so much happier, so much more balanced now. I would never go back to teaching, no matter how much I loved teaching English in a high school. You hear that, and then you hear somebody saying, I've been teaching a STEM subject for 20 years, and I don't think I can go on much longer. Teaching is making me sick. I can't go on. Dr Heleen Hofmeyr conducted the research that Rebecca and I were talking about, a postdoctoral research fellow at the Research on Socio-Economic Policy unit at Stellenbosch University. Heleen, a very, very good afternoon to you. Thank you for your time.
Hi, Don. Thanks for having me.
You do a bit of research like this because you kind of anticipate the horrible picture that your research is going to uncover, I guess.
A little bit, John. So this started exactly with what you were saying, this feeling that teachers are leaving the profession prematurely, and we wanted to understand the reasons why. But I think we were not quite prepared for hearing exactly how difficult the circumstances is that teachers are facing.
I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that there was a part of me that went, come on, everybody's stressed. Talk to anybody in any job, and a good number are going to tell you that they'd love to do something else which is less stressful. But upon slightly deeper reflection, it is clear that there is something unique to the teacher stress situation.
Absolutely. And that was my kind of pushback as well first when we started thinking about what our results were showing. I said, I don't want to say, boo-hoo, poor teachers, everybody stresses, deal with it. But I think what really came through and why we wanted to bring this research to the fore is that it's so clear that South African children are struggling under the social ills in our country. They are exposed to violence at a very young age. They're exposed to crime or the threats of crime. Sometimes there's cases even of neglect. And I think that teacher stress is about dealing with that. And so it's similar to kind of the healthcare profession, where I'm more and more seeing teachers as these kind of frontline workers who are really dealing with the very harsh realities of our country. And then, of course, dealing with children, which in many cases can be very, very difficult and heartbreaking.
So what do we do? How do we stop the sense of delight that I heard in my listener's voice when she told me about having left teaching 2 years ago? How do that man who sent me a voice note saying, been teaching 20 years, I want to quit, it's making me sick. What do we do to make that man want to continue teaching and to make that young woman want to go back to teaching English?
Yeah, so I think there's only a handful of things that are actually going to be feasible, right? I mean, ideally, my feeling from having conducted this study and hearing about how teachers, I think one of the main emotional stresses that they experience is having to take on this role of being a psychologist, or a social worker, in some cases even a caregiver. So the obvious solution there is, put those mental health professionals in schools. That's clearly what we need to do. It's the norm in many other countries to have OTs, counselors within schools, and it's kind of strange that we don't have that in South Africa. So I think that is the first one in terms of the kind of the emotional burnout that teachers face. But then a big thing that came out of our study is also that there's a major administrative burden that teachers face. They feel that there is so much admin to do. And again, it's one of those things where, admin is part of life, so we don't want to say, oh, shame, you have to do admin. But I think what was particularly frustrating for teachers was this feeling that they were doing admin that was kind of redundant and repetitive in many cases. So doing tasks, filling in reports for 60 learners that they had to send to their district, only to realize or have the perception that nobody was actually looking at these reports. It was just kind of going into the ether. So it was just this perception that a lot of their work was just a box-ticking exercise. And I think for anyone doing work that you feel is completely pointless is going to be very stressful, and it's going to want to push you out of that profession.
But if okay, I take the point. What was the number? 70% of the teachers that you talked to said administrative tasks were their biggest source of stress, not the actual teaching. And the man who wanted to quit teaching after 20 years said, the kids are fine. It's I've always worked in under-resourced areas, so I've got kids in my class that would potentially be seen as being troublesome kids that I would have difficulty teaching. It's not that. It's all the other stuff that I had to do that is my biggest. So, okay. But if a lot of the stress has to do with the stress that is inherent in the school-going population, the vast majority of whom live in environments that are very difficult to navigate, and they don't have the skills, the experience, the support to help them navigate those conditions successfully. So unless you change that, how much do you change the situation? And to change the environment in which children grow up and which they bring with them into the classroom, that's the work of decades, unfortunately.
Absolutely. It is the work of decades. But at the same time, schools provide this opportunity where really you're bringing in children who are from these difficult circumstances. You have FaceTime with them every single day. So I'm, an eternal optimist. The way I see it is, why not use schools as an opportunity to start addressing, some of these really difficult emotional situations that children are facing. It's very difficult to intervene in the home. Very, very difficult. What are you going to do? Are you going to pay field workers to go out and knock on somebody's door? That's tough. But schools are a place where children go every single day. So I think that there's a major opportunity to use schools to start to do some of this important work.
Heleen, I'm in preparing for this interview, had a look at your CV, had a look at some of the research work that you've been done, had a look at your major research interests, and I think, well, I know I would benefit, and I think many of our listeners would benefit from a longer conversation with you. So that's something we will be trying to do in the next weeks and months. Have you on the radio for 15 minutes instead of 7 or 8. I hope you'll be available for that.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Don.
Dr. Heleen Hofmeyr is a postdoctoral research fellow at Stellenbosch University in their Research on Socio-Economic Policy unit.